everyone. This is Deb Accomando from ResumeBoss.com, and welcome to the 10 toughest interview questions for PAs. We're about to put some of your deepest, darkest interview fears to rest once and for all in just a moment. But before we get into the weeds on the interview questions, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory. Before we developed Resume Boss and all the online training that we now offer, we used to offer PA students a live interview preparation and career workshop that we called Launched. And so preparing for the Launched workshop, we decided that we were going to survey a bunch of PA students to understand better the issues you were facing as you transitioned from, academic to professional life, so we could, teach you what you needed to know so you could feel confident. And we knew from our own experience that candidates worry about, how to answer tough interview questions. And so we're like, all right, so let's dig up some of our clients' interview question lists, the ones that healthcare organizations actually use to conduct their PA interviews, and run a bunch by our PA students and find out which ones freaked them out the most. So that's exactly what we did. We pulled 30 questions from those lists and we included them in our survey. And the results we got, they were very interesting. Would you like to know what questions PA students worry about most? Are you ready? All right, so here are the PA students' top 5 most feared interview questions. 5, tell me about yourself. Crazy, right? I mean, for 27% of you, tell me about yourself was one of the top 5 scariest interview questions, and I was surprised to hear that. Number 4, what salary are you expecting? 32% of you were concerned about getting the money question, right? And so that sort of makes sense. Number 3, what is your greatest weakness? 32% of you included that question in your top 5. An interview classic, makes sense. Number 2, why should I hire you? 36% of you were concerned about grappling with this question. And this was another surprise for us. We figured it might make the list, but we didn't think it was going to be at number 2. And the number 1 most commonly cited scary interview question was, are you ready? Tell me about a recent challenge you handled poorly. What did you learn from it? And what change did you make to address that challenge? Almost 60% of PA students said that this question was one of the 5 that they feared the most. 60%. Pretty interesting, right? And so we finally completed the survey and we felt like, hey, we're ready to address your concerns. We were planning to bang through the questions and tell you guys what we felt the interviewers were looking for in each question, and then tell you how to structure your answer so that you could knock it out of the park when your interviews, rolled around. But, then we thought, wait, what if the APP leaders don't actually ask the same questions that PA students are afraid to answer? What if they completely ask different questions? And then we thought, well, how would we even know? And so we were like, man, what are we going to do? But then we said, wait a second. Well, we know a lot of APP leaders. Let's just ask them. And so that's what we did. So in just a few moments, you're going to see the actual interviews we conducted with some of the best APP leaders across the country, asking them what the toughest questions they ask their PA candidates during the interviews, which were the ones that they used to help, better understand whether those same candidates are likely to make great hires for them. And then we asked them something else that we thought might be very important. We asked them how candidates should be answering those very same questions. So how does that sound, right? Pretty good information to have. But I have to level with you on something. I know we call this video the 10 toughest interview questions for PAs, but we actually didn't cover 10 questions. I know, that doesn't sound good, right? We actually covered 33. So I hope it's okay that I over-deliver. The one other thing I want to mention before we start, these top 5 most feared questions we just reviewed a minute ago, well, 4 of them are covered by our panel of APP leaders. And I'll tell you how to answer the last question at the end. Sound good? All right, let's get started. So Dean, what is the toughest question you ask on an interview?
The toughest question I ask on an interview. Well, I think it comes down to the interview, who's asking the questions, right? And what question I like to answer, not to stress someone out, it's just more or less to ask them and see how they respond to situations, okay? And maybe a question about conflict resolution. I said, this just popped in my head. So you're working and you're taking care of this patient, and you think this patient should not be discharged from the emergency room, right? Because you think blah, 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 right? But you go to your supervising doc, said, I really think this person needs to be admitted to the hospital. And he says, no, discharge the patient. What are you going to do? Right? So that.
I just got nervous for a second. I thought you were asking me.
So I had this psych patient, right?
Hey.
That's why I said that, right? If you guys don't know, Deb's a superb social worker in psychiatry at Columbia, right? So I'm sure she's been asked a lot of difficult questions. So the question, it's easy to get to ask a difficult question, and the concern is what kind of answer do you get to your difficult question, right? So if I'm asking difficult questions, and sometimes I tailor make it, I don't have a root one I do, but if there's something that I'm interested in this candidate, I may ask them a question to elicit a certain kind of response, meaning how do they handle different situations? And that tells you a lot, right? So the example I just gave, you disagree with this doc that you're quote unquote supervisor, right? What are you going to do? Well, that brings about your own self-worth, number one. What's best for the patient? You're being advocate. Is the person making the final decision correct or incorrect, and what do? There's conflict with you and the patient. There's conflict on your interaction with your team member. There's conflict with what you think may be right but may not be right because you're a new graduate, so how would you handle that, right? Those kind of questions, and that's just an exemplification of, you can ask a tough question, the other tough question, and it just popped in my head, right? And this is in relationship to COVID. This is something that we all went through as individuals and all through as a society that we had never gone through, a pandemic. Like, what the heck is this about, right? So our job obviously is taking care of patients. But it's the only time in my entire career, and I mentioned this to all, I've had conversations with my colleagues about, God, we can go to work, we can catch a virus that can kill us in 48 hours, That's scary stuff, right? We all have stressful jobs. You come home, but you're coming home. But we're in a job that you potentially are exposing yourself, not only yourself, but your family members, your wife, your kids, right? And that's a hard decision to make. So the reason I'm bringing this is ducktail, because we had candidates coming in for our job to work in the emergency department and also for our residency during COVID. So the question I ask, and I use an analogy of a fireman, right? So house is burning down, people are running out, and the firemen are running in, right? Same thing in medicine, hospital medicine, emergency medicine, surgery, whatever the case may be, trauma. Everybody's running out of the building to be safe, and you want to run into the building, okay? Tell me why you want to run into the building, right? Right?
Do you see the hair just stood up on my arms?
Right. That, I think, is probably the toughest question I ask, okay? And I get emotionally even thinking about this. So that's a question I would suspect no one has ever been asked as far as a candidate coming in for an interview. Right. And it's amazing to see the emotional responses, okay? And the responses that I saw where people becoming red-eyed, tearful, and crying with their responses. I get emotions just thinking about it. And to me, someone running into the building as everyone's running out says it all. All these other things is kind of what I refer to as stuff, right? Academic stuff, just work stuff. But your heart and soul and your passion about wanting to care for a human being and putting your life at risk to do that, I said, that says it all. And when I ask that question and I get that kind of emotional response, that just fills me full of warmth and a good feeling about our people that want to go into medicine.
So let's talk a little bit about the what you see as your toughest interview question, because I know everyone's preparing and they want to be well prepared, but invariably most interviewers have really kind of their toughest question that they ask during an interview? So
I can think of two things that I ask candidates that are a little bit tough that they may not be prepared for. And the first is something that I can guarantee they will encounter at some point in their career when they see a patient who is not very nice and they may not know what to do for that patient. Mm-hmm. How do they present to that patient? What are some of the things they might say to that patient? So if they've examined them and there's something going on that they really don't know the answer to, and this patient is not making it easy for them.
So why are you asking that?
Because I want to know a little bit about how that PA sitting in front of me is going to deal with a situation that they are not prepared for, just like they may not be prepared for answering that question right then and there. Mm-hmm. It gives me a little bit of feedback in terms of how they might work under pressure. Are they going to stop, take a moment, and think about what they would do, which I want to see? Are they going to say, it's a great question. I don't know what I would do, but I am going to go home and think about it because I know that I'm going to see that in my career. And the question could be, maybe you just have a difficult patient. And how would you react to that? I want to know that they will use resources. If they don't know the answer to treating that patient, will they go to a provider? Are they going to tell the patient they don't know? Are they going to make up the answer? I want to know just a little bit about their process of thinking.
So what does a great answer look like to that question? You've posed that question out in an interview.
It's I think something where you want that PA to be able to sit down across from that patient, eye to eye, no matter how difficult that patient may be acting or how upset. There's a reason for it. Maybe they're not feeling well. Maybe they're in pain. To be patient with that patient and to just say, I'm going to try and help you. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I can promise you I will find out. And if I won't, I will have somebody help me and you through this and guide them. So maybe they'll speak with the doctor about it, or maybe they'll do something else. But I also want to know that that person's going to then utilize the resources, whatever. That's where your training comes into play too. What resources are you using? What does the organization use? Who's the provider? What questions are they going to ask? But to just assure that patient that even if they can't give them the answer right then and there, somebody will help them and they will get to the bottom of it.
And if someone's answering the question, it sounds like in the manner you just described, what are you thinking when you're getting that answer that is resonating with you?
From the candidate, you mean? I think that tells me that this person is going to stop and think before reacting. And you want that. And a lot of times in healthcare, especially if you're seeing a lot of patients and you don't have a lot of time and you're overwhelmed and you know you have a list of things to do, it's very easy to just react and to get frustrated and to maybe piss people off, including your patients. And you always have to be able to just take a step back, take a moment, take a breath, and then keep going. And I think I want to see that in the interview. Because if you can do that in the interview, you can do that with your patients.
What does that feel like for you when they're hitting the mark?
I think to myself, this person's going to go places in their career. That if they're like this now and they're just starting off, that they're going to do well. And their interaction with me is going to be a sign of how they interact with their patients. Mm-hmm.
So it's giving you that confidence.
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
You said you had two questions. I don't know if you remember the second one.
I do.
Okay. So what's behind door number 2?
I like to know what the dynamic is going to be between the PA and, let's say, a colleague or a manager or a doctor who may not have the best personality or who may be difficult or who may present problematic in terms of maybe they don't appreciate APPs. There, believe it or not, still doctors in the world who do not appreciate the fact that nurse practitioners and physician's assistants are taking on more of an internal medicine role. And there is a little bit of resentment there. And they don't want us to see their patients because they're their patients.
So there's that ownership.
And there's an ownership involved. And I do like to ask that question of, how will you react to that?
What's a great answer?
I think that a great answer that I like to hear from a PA or a nurse practitioner is that they, number one, appreciate the fact that that may happen, that they acknowledge the fact that that does exist, because it does still, and that they would be able to sit down with that provider and talk about it. As hard as it might be, it's something that does need to be spoken about, to be able to have the comfort to walk into your collaborating physician and to sit down and say, hey, this was a little uncomfortable for me.
During the interview process, what do you think the toughest question you ask is?
Oh,
not to put you on the spot.
Oh, geez. One of my favorite questions, it's two questions. I'll ask somebody, people that like you. Why do they like you? What is it about you that they like? And time and time again, the applicants, will just, completely vomit all of this good stuff about themselves. And so I wait, I'm listening, but then I wait and I say, the people that don't like you, why don't they like you? And that usually freezes people up, because and so some people have good self-reflection and they know why. There's something about them. Some people are a little bit too, time oriented, and they're very, stiff about time or performance and things like that. And it can rub people the wrong way. So, they'll reflect on that. But for some people that don't have reflection, or they're so set on, selling themselves to us, they don't know what to say. So it's good for me. I'm not trying to pick on people. I want to see what your self-reflection is, because for me, later on in the orientation process, if you can't reflect on yourself, the good and the bad and the ugly, orientations can be more difficult, especially when you're getting that feedback. So that's the reason why I asked that question. But so I guess that's the only tough question I have. But I like to use behavioral type questions. So instead of saying, what would you do in a situation in the future, some hypothetical situation, I'm going to ask you about a time that you had to deal with something. And I'm looking for a real story. I'm looking for a real reaction from you. And what that tells me is that's how you responded to that situation in the past. It's authentic, it's true. Usually the person has no idea I'm going to ask that question. So the first thing they come up with is actually true. But what it tells me is that's probably how they're going to react in the future. So that's the importance of those behavioral type questions. So big buckets for behavioral questions I'm going to ask is communication, difficult communication that you've had. It could be with a boss, a coworker, a spouse, a friend. I'm going to ask about situations where you failed and how you dealt with that failure. I'm going to ask you questions where you walked into uncertainty, and how did you react to uncertainty?
You ask about a time where you failed and how you dealt with it. What are you looking for in their answer? Like, what are the things that are going to make you go, okay, this is a person that we could take a risk on?
So I would expect for anybody that once you have failed at something, it could be, especially for students coming out, getting their first job, you failed on a test, you failed a program, there was some kind of failure. It's usually academics. I expect that you're going to react. You're going to have a bad reaction in the beginning. All of us, we feel horrible after failure. But what did you do in the days after that? Did you reflect on it, figure out what you did wrong, and then approach it in a different way to become successful? Did it cause you to have drive inside of you to figure it out and to move forward?
I love that explanation, because I think I'd imagine a lot of students, they're afraid to maybe reveal their vulnerabilities or what they did wrong. But it's not so much about the vulnerability or the example, but what they did after that.
What did it cause you to do? Right.
I think that's really invaluable advice.
Yeah. So you're right. So students typically, or new graduates, will not talk about their vulnerabilities. That's why we incorporate them into questions. So we uncover that rock and get to it.
I want to know, what is the toughest question you ask on an interview? And what kind of answer are you looking for?
Oh, geez. For us, I'm pretty direct about their commitment to the practice. Like I have to push through my own discomfort to just ask direct questions. Like, this is our struggles. Are you willing to stay? What are your goals? You know, what's your family life like? For us, like for interviewing people with small children, are you planning to stay in the area? Are your kids enrolling in school in the area? Because for us, it just right now with this market, the commitment is the most important. And that's because it's oncology, you know, patients, they need a continuous care team.
Mm-hmm. So for you, the toughest questions really are around making sure the provider you're hiring is in it for the long haul, so they're better serving your patients who, like you said, are long-term patients. They're not just coming in for one appointment and
right,
you know, getting cured and then they're off.
Yeah. Like we've been through nine physicians in the last 2.5 years. And a lot of those are locums, kind of helping out and things, but because there's so few providers around, it's people I think are really going to be looking for you to be committed.
So tell me, what do you think is your toughest interview question that you ask?
Without a doubt, the toughest interview question is, why are you here? Why are you sitting in front of me?
Tell me about that.
If someone can articulate their passion and their reasons, they can also articulate their caring, and they can communicate with patients, and they can, you know, it just shows if they can communicate like that with me, they'll be able to communicate they can think like that and communicate with their patients. I'll give you an example. I interviewed, and this was a doctor, it wasn't a PA. I interviewed a doctor, and the doctor was from Connecticut, actually. And this was in Arizona. And he was an avid hiker. Just loved to be outdoors and loved to hike, and thought that the West it's another world, and you know, and I said, you know, that's all well and good, and that's great. I'm thrilled. What about the patients? I go, well, that goes without saying. Patients are why I'm here. Patients are why I went to school. I want to take care of people. But at the same time, I understand I need to take care of myself. That's what sold me. Okay? That he knew that, because I can't tell you how many times people come in, they work, they burn themselves out, and they don't take care of themselves. This guy said, I have a passion for my patients, but I also have to take care of myself. And I was like, great, I love this guy, you know.
What other things could they be asking, or what other type of information should they be armed with to answer that question, why are you here?
Well, I think each grad knows why they went to school. What prompted that decision to do this? Okay, and that decision should also be why you're sitting here in front of me. Okay, somebody treated you right in the past. You had some sort of specific encounter with a medical professional that really was like, oh man, this is what I want to do. You know, those types of things are what you want to put on the table.
And how should they be preparing specifically for, that one-on-one interview with a particular organization?
So I think there's three things that tend to be asked all the time. One is, why are you here? The other one is, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Okay. They're always asking, give me your 5 strongest attributes. Give me your 5 weaknesses that you need to work on. I would think long and hard about those, because those questions are asked a lot. Then the next level of questions, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Okay. Do you see yourself in 5 years?
And what and what are you looking for in an answer? What can that new grad be telling you where they want to be in 5 years?
I think in 5 years, a new grad wants to be experienced to the point where they are trusted by their supervising physicians and trusted by their patients. And that is huge. That is a huge 5-year goal for a physician assistant, is to earn and gain the trust to be, quote unquote, on your own.
Let's talk about, we talked a lot about the interview process and questions and what they could be doing. When is an interview going south? What are some of the red flags that come up during an interview that make you put the brakes on?
When the hair on the back of your neck stands up from the question.
What questions make the hair on the back of your neck stand up?
Are you willing to work 7 days a week? Are you willing to work nights? Are you willing to do anything I say? It's things that's like, why are you asking me this? Why I don't understand.
So back up. So
So I'm the grad.
Yep.
And I'm being asked questions that just seem off.
Okay.
So my sense of right and wrong.
Okay.
And what should be asking me. They should,
So that's I'm going to stop you for a second.
Would you be would you be willing to make a referral to this? Would you be almost trying to catch you in some sort of ethical dilemma? Mm-hmm. Okay, because we have ethical dilemmas. We have doctors coming up to other doctors saying, "Listen, which is against the law, by the way, if you send me this patient, I'll do this for you." So there is none of that that goes on.
So what's interesting is that I'm going to ask you the question again, but I love your answer, and it made me think for a second. When I asked it, I was asking about what the employer might be thinking is a red flag from the candidate, but you gave a great response in terms of what a potential employer might be asking a new grad, which would make the new grad go, well, wait a minute, this is
time out.
Right. Was awesome. What's your toughest interview question?
So knowing I was coming here, I had to stop and think, what is the toughest question? And I realized I don't ask really tough questions. So I have one of my most experienced PAs on my team. She's been a PA for 30 years. And she, as well as the rest of the members of my team, help with the interview process. So I asked her this morning, I was like, what's the toughest thing you ask PAs when they come and interview? So we sat there and had a good chuckle for a while, because we both realized, and we are both of the generation of, we're like the tough old PAs, that actually when we interview, we don't ask. And I don't know why we don't ask, but, like I said, we will ask about, being part of a team and what your skills are like and why you want to come here. But there are always tough questions that people can ask. I asked some of the other my other colleagues, and I said, what are tough questions that have come through? And I think the biggest one, and for and this is across the board, is clinical situations. So, sometimes they will give you a scenario of, something that happens to a patient and how would you deal with it? And especially for someone new, and even as someone that has very experienced, that can be a tough question to think about and answer, is what you would do in certain situations. So I think that's one. And that was.
So I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
What would be the framework on how someone should be responding if they're given one of those clinical scenarios?
Sure.
Like, what are you looking for?
Honestly, I'm looking for an honest answer. So, for example, if a patient just had surgery and they all of a sudden you get a call from the nurse because their blood pressure's high and their heart rate is high, and they look very pale. What do you do? And I don't mean it as a question to like get you frazzled, but I just want to know quick in that clinical situation, what are you going to do? Like, what are your thought processes of what could possibly be going on? Because in our world, we're constantly thinking about, well, if there's a problem, it could be X, Y, or Z. And I just want to know that X, Y, and Z are the things that you should be thinking.
Well, what does it look like when that candidate or that new grad, you could see they're getting it? What does that look? How does that translate to?
You
what
can
you're
tell,
hearing?
because if they say to me, like in that kind of scenario, you're worried about, have they had blood loss? So, or if they have a fever. So you're at, you want them to be able. I want them to be able to say to me, I think that they may be developing anemia and it's causing their blood pressure to go down, and their heart rate is high because the blood's not pumping as well as it should be. You just want to know that knowledge base, that they know what they should be doing.
Mm-hmm. And then what are you thinking as you're getting the different answers to that question? How are you evaluating?
Of course it's, what is their thought process? Because hopefully they're telling me that, just as I explained what would be going on, are they thinking on the right path? Are they in the right mindset of that, yes, this is how to take care of the patient, or are they totally in the wrong direction and they're not really understanding the scenario? Because if they're, and it wouldn't be like, something totally complex, but if it's a basic scenario that they should have a general understanding, then it's probably not the right thing for them and our team. So that's what we're looking for, is just that they can understand on a general scale what we're looking for.
Ryan, what is the toughest question that you ask on an interview?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I always throw it back at them. I asked them right off the bat, tell me, why do you think you'd be a perfect fit for this position? Why would I consider you over another candidate? Granted, they don't know the candidates that they're up against, but I want them to be able to sell themselves. I want them to be able to look at themselves inwardly and tell me why they're going to be a great candidate. And I'm hoping that they took time aside, at home, where not they have to rehearse this stuff in the mirror or have their spouse or significant other ask them questions. But that's probably one of the bigger things. Outside of that, I asked them, what do they know about this practice or this health system? Because I want them to know and understand the key ideas and, strategic planning and the vision of the health system as well. Of course, I asked those standard questions, have you ever disagreed on the care of a patient with a physician, and kind of ask them, well, what was the outcome? What did that look like? I asked them, what people do you have problems interacting with as well? Because I want to know, are there people that are on my current team that maybe they may not mesh with? And if I bring them in, is this something that I need to be cognizant? So that not only helps me, but also helps that candidate as well. And then I think, I also ask if they have a current job, what's the best, what's the worst thing about the job? Because I really want to see, can they constructively think without throwing their current job under the bus of, why they're looking at leaving? Maybe it's just something that, it's a schedule thing, or maybe their life's changed, or maybe this is their ideal job that they've finally been waiting for and they got a foot in the door. And then finally, I asked, what's their involvement in the PA professional societies and everything like that? Have they ever lectured or anything of that nature? Would they be willing to precept? Because certainly for me, I'm big on education. Certainly there's, a lack of rotations for students as well as more PA programs, come to fruition and come on out. Like I want to be able to combat that. And I want to make sure that they're on that team because that's the ideal person that I want. It's once again, about giving back because at one point these PAs were students and they need to rely on these preceptors to bring them in.
Those are all really amazing questions. What's kind of going through my mind is one of the first couple of things you brought up were being able to sell yourself and knowing why you're there. And you would, for those of us that are experienced interviewing or that have been involved in a lot of hiring, that's obvious. But I think that's great information for a new grad because you said that was the first thing you said, that those were your toughest questions, but those are things that those new grads should really be thinking of and be well prepared. That's where you could really knock it out of the park because you're not coming in with years of experience, but you should know why you're there and you should know what you're bringing to the organization and why you want to be at that particular hospital or practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think just in general, the human nature, certainly here in the US, is we're go, go, go. It's really hard to get us to stop and take a touch point, like, why am I doing this? And certainly I think it's very vital when you're under a significant amount of stress to stop and just talk to yourself and ask, why am I doing this? Why did I go into the PA profession? Why do I want to do what I want to do? And I think you should ask those same questions before every job, no matter how different it is. I mean, it could be urology, it could be ER. If you're applying to a multitude of jobs, you have to make sure that you have a very well-rehearsed idea and thought process when you get in and have that interview as well.
What's the toughest question you ask on an interview?
I like to ask about how you would deal with a particular patient who's not doing well. If you've had it, and everybody's had a patient that's sick, and not everybody does great and leaves the hospital. So how would you deal with a difficult situation? And
how could someone answer that in a way that tells you that they're on the right track? This is someone we could be working with.
Well, they have to have an approach that is systematic, that is, they have to know their limits, so they have to, know where to go when they need additional help. I would be interested to hear about how they, dealt with the family, because that's always very difficult as well. Their communication skills, either with other team members, other services, family members, that sort of thing. But the skills need to come. They will develop. It's about how you approach a problem, I think.
Mm-hmm. And what are you kind of thinking when they are giving you that answer? What's going through your mind in terms of evaluating?
I like to see someone who's confident but knows their limits, who has a systematic approach to a problem, but knows what to do if that approach isn't working.
What do you think is the toughest question that a new grad could get asked? What do you think is one of the toughest questions, maybe that of or that you yourself kind of have in your bag of tricks?
It's funny because I had an interview today. I was interviewing someone and I said to them, how do you deal with conflict? And she said, that's always the hardest question. And it is, and especially for a new grad, because as we are interviewing you, we want to know, how do you deal with other people? Because there's no crash course to see how they're going to handle if another PA is picking on them or if they have a difficult patient. And they don't really have enough experience outside of their clinical rotations. So I think they need to think ahead. They probably know their strengths. Obviously, their weakness is going to be that they don't have a lot of experience, but how they handle conflict, how they handle working with other team members, you really have to pull on acting as if your clinical rotations were a job. And I think going in with that mindset is, I have a year of experience. It's just 5, 6, 8 weeks at a time in different hospitals. But usually the question that I find people will take that moment and think about is, how do you handle conflict?
Okay.
How do you handle a difficult patient? The other question I'll ask, and they may not have an answer for it yet, is what's the biggest medical error you've made and how did you fix it? Did you own up to it?
Right.
Who caught it? That kind of thing.
So let's go back to the question about conflict, right? Because we're going to have a lot of new grads that say, great, I've read that in a book or someone else has told me or I've seen it on the internet. But the $64,000 question is, you as someone who interviews and hires physician assistants, what's a great answer? What do you think would be a good way to answer a question like that? What's like the framework?
For me, it's head on. It's not avoiding that there's a conflict. It's saying we're coming to a disagreement and I want to deal with it head on and I want to deal with it early. I don't want to let it build. And if it seems like it's spiraling out of control and I can't take care of it myself, I want to be able to know that I can go to a leader and ask for help and get it.
Okay.
Because what I don't like is when people will tell me, oh, I just handle it on my own. Or I'll get them in a room and talk it out with them. Because sometimes, especially from an HR perspective, right, that's also not the best way to handle it because it may not be safe for that new grad.
Right.
So
what do you think about the new graduate who maybe obviously hasn't had experience as a professional, as a physician assistant? If you're asking them a tough question and maybe they revert back to a prior career or a job that they had growing up and they're still able to articulate, but what if they answer the question at a context of, the hospital or, the traditional physician assistant setting?
I think it all counts. I think life experience has to be counted. We've been learning how to deal with conflict since we were a child. So I think that's very welcomed in an interview to show me that you can think outside the box and you may not have it with medicine, but you have examples elsewhere. I think that works sufficiently.
Well, my favorite one is the toughest question I've been asked, and that is, tell me a joke. So when somebody, when you're getting towards the end of an interview, and it's a super formal setting, and everybody's all buttoned up, and jokes are really hard to tell, and most people don't have a decent one offhand. It really, the few times that I've actually done it, if anybody's ever managed to tell a joke that's not offensive and that sort of thing, it really says a lot about your mental agility to me. And so that's the toughest question that I don't always ask, because sometimes it's not important because sometimes it just doesn't fit. But I remember mine. So I only use it because it was what I was asked when I was trying to get into school. And yeah, it was a panel. So there were, this was yeah. There were 4 people interviewing me, but there were also 6 people they were interviewing. It was a weird setup, but luckily I was able to see it coming because I was third in line. And so they asked they asked the first person to tell a joke. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get a joke together. So they said, tell a joke. And I very quickly said, so a dyslexic walks into a rab. End of joke. Because it's, so I didn't make anybody mad, and everybody was confused. And I got into that school. I didn't go to it, I got in. So you'll probably have to cut that, but I haven't gotten many. Usually it's why the chicken crossed the road. Somebody will, throw that one out there. It's
the biggest one I love to ask is a failure question. Name one time that you failed and why did you fail? What'd you learn from it? And it's amazing that question still trips people up. When they can't think of a time they failed, that concerns me. Either that they're not aware that they failed at something, or that they're just not wanting to tell you. And I think as a provider, you have to know, especially as an APP or a PA, you have to know kind of your guardrails of when you might get in trouble clinically and when you might not get in trouble. So if they can't recognize when something's going wrong, I think we got huge red flags there. So I would encourage everybody out there to start thinking about a time that you failed and embrace it. Embrace your failure. Because let me tell you, as a PA, you're going to fail a lot. And how you handle that failure probably is going to determine your career. I've seen many careers ruined where someone didn't handle failure right. So you have to be able to understand that. A lot of young kids coming out of school, they don't handle that question well. So that just tells me maybe their maturity isn't there yet. Maybe they're not really had much failure. And I would rather have someone who has failure.
Yeah. So great. So we're talking about the failure question and how to answer that and what you're looking for. But give me an example of how someone could answer that question. What does that look like?
Yeah, the first part is being honest about the failure itself. But then secondly, the key is the second part of the question is, what did you learn from it? What did you do as a result?
So talk me through an example. Talk me through a response that someone might give you that you're like, you hit it out of the park.
Sure. I'll try and give you a real life example. I don't remember the specialty. This one's been a number of years ago, but the particular person, this is during PA school. The particular person was working at a pediatric kind of clinic, essentially. And I think when you have pediatrics, you have the dynamics of the child and then the parents, right? It's those kind of dynamics. This particular preceptor, it seemed that they gave a lot of autonomy to their students who rotated through. It was a very busy practice, that sort of thing. And this particular PA kind of made a mistake in terms of diagnosis, but on top of that, maybe the communication of that mistake to the parents wasn't the greatest. And so when she came in for an interview, it was centered around, and when she was describing this journey that she went through, she was in over her head in terms of, her clinical knowledge just wasn't there. She misdiagnosed a child. She didn't have great communication to the attending physician at the time. And therefore it led this child down a negative path in terms of outcomes for the patient. On top of that, though, she's still in fear, having some pride and fear of not wanting to go to the physician, still had this mindset that she can kind of get out of it. Like she can kind of help triage and get out of it. And she talked to the other PAs and the other colleagues in the office, but never went to the attending. And so she's telling us this story, and then she's almost tearing up about it, which, it's great. She's showing emotion, remorse, reflection. But then she talked about, most importantly, what she learned from it, which was, I talked earlier about the scope of practice. And you are in this bubble here. And when you get beyond that bubble, it is your turn to put down your pride, put down this big head you might have, even as a student, and go to someone and just run a case by them. There's no harm. There's no, the pride has got to go away. And I think that's the key to being an APP, especially, is you have to understand how to pull levers. And in that moment, that student learned right away how to pull a lever that she couldn't do at the time. And so her telling that story, getting emotional, telling about what she learned from it, most importantly, and how she would do it differently in the future. I mean, you see a student go through that, even if they're young, I'll hire that person any day. I mean, any day. It's all about that, I think.
I'm just sitting here listening to you recount that story, and wow, most maybe students that are watching this are thinking like, oh my God, what a risk to take. But like, you brought it full circle with like, yeah, it was the risk, but then she showed the emotion, and then she showed she could learn from it and what she did. And, that was probably, I'd venture to say, like, that was probably one of the best answers that, interviewee gave you during the process.
For sure.
So what's going on?
There's been 3 of those, and that was one of them I remember for sure.
What are you thinking as she's saying that? As she's giving you that story?
Well, I think anybody who's hearing that can think back to when they were, that young in their career, or even if they're older in their career, and you have to make that decision. Do I keep going, or do I get some help, or, collaborate with others. And so at first I felt for her. I was like, gosh, I know where you're at. I've made the same mistake. So I think that's the first thing. And then secondly, again, was just so impressed with, kind of, she had like bullet points of here's what I would do differently this time and to not make that mistake ever again. And so when you see that, like all in one question, you see her struggle to even answer it, get emotional, and then come back up with a great, like, here's what I'll do next time.
That's amazing.
Okay, I'll hire you.
I agree. What is the toughest question you ask?
I've got a couple. All right.
Yeah, I'll hear more.
One is, who are you when no one's looking?
Who are you when no one's looking?
And it takes people by surprise, typically. It's not an unusual question. It's out there on the lists, but it requires self-reflection in that moment. And for someone to just spew an answer back, it's not very impressive. Sometimes I'll get a response back where they'll say, so what do you mean by that? And I wrestle with that because I think it's pretty straightforward. I'd like to think you're self-aware enough that you know what I'm asking, but it's a hard one to put words around that.
What are you looking for?
But
in the answer?
It's a question of integrity. That's purely what it is. And so for you to be able to put words around that, to say, I hope I'm honest. I hope I'm compassionate. Maybe don't to be too overly confident, but it maybe gets right to the soul of who you are. And so I'll throw that one out. More so judging how do they handle it, because that's a tough question. And so to be able to put them on the hot seat a little bit, see how they wrestle that one. Are they a knee-jerk response, or do they quickly just say, I don't understand that question. Can you rephrase it? I want to have you think about that.
What else?
Yeah, the other question that I like to pull, and I see it a lot on sheets of common questions, is to ask some version of who is your hero? Or who is someone who is no longer alive that you look up to, or something like that. I'm looking for the response to show self-awareness and self-reflection. And the response is supposed to be something that tells me more about really what's important, what's the heart of the candidate. And so a common answer is a family member, grandma, my mom. And if it sits there, well, everybody loves their mom or their grandma. So there's got to be more of a story in there. The tough part is every once in a while, it causes a break in emotion. You should never cry in an interview, but I think with this question, maybe, if it's real and sincere, you shouldn't be too embarrassed about that, because you may be telling a story that's pretty intimate and pretty meaningful. And so I don't look down on someone who in that moment, but it's so interesting to hear a broad mix of responses where it may be a president or it may be a political figure, or a lot of times it's a family member, but I want to hear why. Why is that person a hero for you? And then I will always hear a story that's unique to that person. But if it comes across as trite or simplistic or superficial, I really respect this person because they've made a lot of money over their career. Boy, that's not the value system I'm looking for in this role. But if I hear them say, Abraham Lincoln is such an amazing man, the way he was able to conduct his presidency despite all the odds and yet uphold his character. I could just learn from him if he was around today to know how did he get through those. That's more, well, okay, I see those are important to you, those are important to me, and I find it fit that way. So I find that to be a very compelling question to ask as well.
So to really kind of dig in, not just give the answer on the surface, but then to really kind of give the underside of it to really show you, like you said, what's going on and hear for them.
To use every question, if you can, to turn it into a story. I'm going to back up to say I earlier said I don't like the question that I'm posed by the candidate that says, what are you looking for? Or what's the right candidate for you? Because I feel like they're going to just try to match it then. Whatever I say, well, I'm your guy. But what if instead I say, well, we're looking for a person who is just compassionate, but a high work ethic and a really strong team player. And then the candidate responds back to me, say, well, here's a story out of my life that shows those traits. That would surprise me. And I don't get that. But that would make, oh, I see. You're able to actually tell me that you meet those criteria. So you're not just looking to match them. You're actually looking to say, am I a good fit here? And now you're going to prove to me you are. Boy, that stands out.
So having all these stories kind of at the ready for the interview that show who you are, why you have the beliefs you have and think the way you do.
Right.
So really storytelling throughout the process.
As much, being careful not to be overly, storytelling, but yeah, to make it real, make it sincere. That is the most compelling way to understand who a person is. Rather than just saying, I'm that way, you're going to show me who you are by your stories.
So that's it. That's the 33 toughest interview questions that PA leaders ask during their interviews. Hopefully, you all learned a lot about what the interviewers are actually looking for from candidates during the interviews. And if you think about it, a lot of those questions sort of make sense, right? Now, did you happen to notice which one of the top 5 most feared interview questions we identified at the beginning of the video was not covered by the panel? I bet some of you did. Ready? It was the money question, number 4 on the top 5 list. What salary are you expecting? The good news is this question, doesn't really come up frequently during initial interview rounds. It typically comes up, if at all, at the end of the interview process. And if your interviewer asks you that question, consider it a good sign because it probably means that they're interested in making you an offer. But they want to get a sense if they could afford to pay you before they invest, too much more time in the interview process. Make sense? So let's talk about how to answer this question. I cover this question in depth in the ebook, Interview Hacks for Physician Assistants, which you can check out right on our website. You can download it instantly. It's totally amazing and easy to read and understand. And it's a really great primer before each interview round and a very quick read. So let's take a look at how we handle the compensation question in the book. If you get asked what salary you're looking for early in the interview process, simply say, I'm excited by what I've seen and heard about, your hospital, and I'm confident that I'd make an excellent fit for the orthopedic position. I would certainly be pleased to consider a reasonable offer that considers my skills, experience, and current compensation package. Now, if you're a new PA and you don't have a salary history, simply reference the market range for new PA candidates in your neck of the woods. You can get PA salary information based on experience level and location from the AAPA and similar professional organizations. And we might even have some similar compensation information too. So check out our website or email us at info@resumeboss.com. If we can help, we certainly will. So now if you're pressed to give a firm answer, which is very unlikely, we suggest you continue to hold out an answer as long as possible and try addressing the question with something like this. I'm so sorry I can't be more specific at this time. I can say that I'm presently earning, whatever it is per year, and all things being equal, I'd welcome an offer that respects that fact. And as the process continues and I learn more about the specifics of the role, the team I'll be working with, the institution, I hope to further narrow down that answer for you. And I hope that you could accept my answer for the time being. So I'm sure many of you are wondering why. Why not just tell them what you're hoping to earn? Seems like a reasonable question, right? Well, here's why you should avoid answering the question, especially at the beginning of the interview process. Number 1, you can undershoot. Let's assume you've succeeded in your interview objective and they love you. They have no other candidates in consideration, and they need to fill the position quickly. You might be worth more than the amount you just told them that you'd be willing to accept. And in that event, you'll be selling yourself short, as they will certainly not offer you more than you just told them that you would accept to take the position. Or you could overshoot. Okay, let's assume again they love you, but they've got other qualified candidates that they like too, and there's no immediate need to fill the position, so they don't have like a sense of urgency. So if the number you tell them is higher than what they believe they should be spending to fill the position, then either one, you're not going to get the offer at all, or two, you might get an offer after all the other less expensive qualified candidates pass on the opportunity. Of course, that assumes that the employer is satisfied that it's seen everybody from the available pool of qualified candidates, which is rarely the case. So even if you succeed in getting them to love you, you'll fail to win the highest offer possible. Make sense? Well, that's all I've got for you right now. If you need additional information or in-depth interview training, definitely check out our Interview Hacks ebook or our One Interview View Away 30-day challenge. We really want to help you master the entire interview process from soup to nuts, so you'll have those critical skills available to you the rest of your life. And you can find all that information right on the recruiterboss.com website. I hope that you found this video super helpful. I mean, we really loved making it for you. So until next time, I'm Deb Accomando. Good luck with all your interviews. I know you're going to do great, and I hope to see you all soon.